All right, so are you ready to tackle Machu Picchu, but in a single day? That's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
Can you actually experience all that magic, but with just one sunrise?
Hmm.
We've got an ambitious itinerary to unpack, all thanks to Paloma, a YouTuber who documented her whole day trip adventure.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about Paloma's approach is that it really tests those limits.
Yeah.
Most people, I think of Machu Picchu as like a multi-day trek,
Right.
but she's proving it can be done on a tight timeline.
A tight timeline is putting it mildly. Her day starts with a 4 a.m. wake-up call.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I love adventure,
Yeah.
but that's some serious dedication.
Right.
If you're planning on following in her footsteps, let's just say strong coffee is non-negotiable.
Definitely. And it's worth noting that most hotels in Cusco are clustered near the airport,
Right.
which adds a layer of logistics to consider.
Okay.
But back to Paloma's journey from the hotel, it's a minivan ride to Ollantaytambo, where she catches the train to Machu Picchu.
Okay, so she's on the Experiencia train. She talks about comfy seats, big windows, Andean decor, but also mentions things being for sale on board. Gives you a sense of the tourist trap vibe that can sometimes overshadow the historical significance.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even in places as historically rich as Machu Picchu, the tourism industry has its own presence. But for now, let's stay focused on the journey. The train eventually pulls into Aguascalientes, the town below Machu Picchu itself.
And here's where things could get tricky for someone on a tight schedule. Paloma talks about navigating crowds to transfer to the buses that take you up to the entrance. She even points out a guide with a flag, which is a helpful tip for finding your group in the chaos.
Right. That little detail could be a lifesaver, especially if you're someone who gets easily overwhelmed in crowds. The bus ride itself is about 32 minutes, winding uphill with incredible views. I can imagine the mix of anticipation and maybe a little motion sickness for some.
I'm getting butterflies just thinking about it. And then finally, you're there at Machu Picchu. Paloma's footage really highlights just how many other tourists are there, too. It's a popular spot, to say the least.
It's something to keep in mind. You'll be sharing the experience with many others,
Right.
which can either add to the energy or detract from that sense of solitude some might seek.
Mm-hmm.
In Paloma's case, she had a guided tour, which is pretty standard for first-timers, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It helps you hit the key spots and get some context. Speaking of key spots, one of the first stops is the Casa del Guardia. You know, that iconic viewpoint where everyone gets their postcard perfect shot of Machu Picchu.
That's the one. It's fascinating to think about how photography shapes our experience of a place. Here's this ancient wonder, and yet, for many, the focus becomes capturing that one perfect image.
It's almost like social media has become part of the Machu Picchu experience itself. But the tour doesn't stop there. From the Casa del Guardia, they move on to the Plaza Sagrada.
Which, for anyone who doesn't speak Spanish, means Sacred Plaza. It's the heart of Machu Picchu, surrounded by important structures like the Temple of the Three Windows and the main temple.
Okay, so we're already getting into some serious Incan history here. And Paloma doesn't just breeze through. She spends time at each location, listening to the guide, taking it all in.
That's a good point. Even though she's on a tight schedule, she's not just rushing from point A to point B. She's actually engaging with the history and culture. The tour continues to the Intihuatana, which is also known as the Hitching Post of the Sun.
Wait, the Hitching Post of the Sun, that sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Well, it's not far off. The Intihuatana is thought to have been an astronomical observatory or a sundial of sorts. It highlights the Incas' deep connection to the cosmos and their impressive understanding of astronomy.
You know, I read somewhere that the Incas believed the Milky Way was a celestial river, and their temples were designed to align with certain stars. It makes you realize how much deeper this place goes beyond just the stunning architecture.
Exactly. Each stone, each structure is imbued with layers of meaning and symbolism. From the Intihuatana, the tour moves on to the Sacred Rock. Think incredible views of Huayna Picchu, that iconic peak you see in so many Machu Picchu photos.
And don't forget the llamas. Paloma gets some great shots of them roaming around, talk about a photogenic bunch. But there's something important to keep in mind about this tour. No backtracking.
Oh, really?
You see what you see, and then you move on.
Wow.
Yeah.
It makes sense from a logistical standpoint. They're trying to keep the flow of tourists moving. But it also adds a certain pressure to the experience. You have one chance to soak it all in, to capture that perfect photo, to ask that burning question.
Knowing that, I'd probably be walking around with my camera in overdrive, afraid to miss a single moment.
I can imagine. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose of history and beauty. And speaking of refueling, after the tour, Paloma opts for the buffet lunch at the Tinku restaurant. It's right there next to Machu Picchu, offering views almost as good as the food, apparently.
And the food sounds incredible. She mentions caldo rellena, ceviche, lomo saltado, all these classic Peruvian dishes. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
It's a smart move to build in a lunch break, especially after all that walking and exploring. Gives you a chance to recharge before heading back down to Aguascalientes.
But the day's not over yet, right? There's still the train ride back, and Paloma emphasizes the importance of arriving at the station at least 30 minutes before departure. I imagine things could get pretty hectic trying to catch that train after such a full day.
Absolutely. You don't want to miss your train back after all that effort to get there.
Yeah.
And once back in Aguascalientes, Paloma uses her remaining time to explore the town and its market. Think colorful textiles, handcrafted jewelry, all those quintessential Andean souvenirs.
Okay, so even on a day trip, there's still time for a little souvenir shopping. I could already picture myself browsing those stalls, trying to decide between a llama figurine and a hand-woven alpaca scarf.
It's a nice way to cap off the experience, taking a piece of the Andes back with you. And speaking of heading back, let's talk about the train options for the return trip. You've got the standard expedition train, similar to the one she took on the way there.
Right, but then there's the Vistadome service, which seems to be a whole other level of experience. Paloma mentioned snacks, panoramic windows.
And a dance performance, complete with an alpaca fashion show.
Wait, an alpaca fashion show? You're kidding, right?
Oh, it's a real thing. Whether it's delightful or a bit over the top is up for debate. But it certainly adds a unique element to the journey. The train eventually arrives back in Ollantaytambo, where it's a minivan ride back to Cusco. The drop-off point is the Plaza Regocijo, conveniently close to the main square.
So, after a whirlwind 16 hours, Paloma's Machu Picchu day trip comes to an end. Exhausted, no doubt, but I bet she slept soundly that night. What I'm curious about is, after all that, is a single day enough to truly appreciate Machu Picchu?
That's the question we'll be exploring in part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into tackling Machu Picchu in a single day.
So we've walked through Paloma's whirlwind itinerary, but the big question lingers. Is it even worth it? I mean, cramming all that into one day seems like you might miss out on, really connecting with the place, right?
Yeah, that's the heart of the debate, isn't it? It really boils down to personal travel style and priorities. Some travelers thrive on that fast-paced checklist approach.
Yeah, I get that. The satisfaction of squeezing it all in.
Yeah.
But doesn't it become more about checking a box than actually experiencing Machu Picchu?
It can. That's where the whole slow travel philosophy comes in. It's about immersing yourself in a destination, taking the time to connect with the culture, and really savoring the journey.
So instead of racing through a list of sites, you're advocating for a more mindful, almost meditative approach to travel.
Exactly. Think about applying that to Machu Picchu. Instead of day trip, you spend several days exploring the Sacred Valley, hiking the Inca Trail, maybe even participating in a traditional ceremony. It's a completely different way of experiencing the place.
I can see the appeal trading a checklist for a deeper connection. But let's be realistic, not everyone has the luxury of taking extended trips. For those who are set on a day trip, is there a way to make it less about ticking boxes and more about meaningful experience?
Absolutely. Even within a day trip, you can make choices that prioritize quality over quantity. For example, instead of a large group tour, opt for a smaller group or even a private guide. That way, you have more flexibility to ask questions, linger at the spots that resonate with you, and maybe even venture off the beaten path a bit.
Makes sense. It's about finding those moments of stillness even amidst the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And maybe skip the alpaca fashion show on the train ride back.
Perhaps. The point is to be intentional about what you want to experience and tailor your itinerary accordingly. Now, Paloma's trip did highlight some practical considerations for anyone attempting a single-day Machu Picchu adventure. First and foremost, that 4 a.m. wake-up call is non-negotiable.
All right, so we've established that strong coffee is essential. But let's talk about the train journey itself. Paloma mentioned the Experiencia train being pretty nice, but also the presence of those for-sale items on board. Can you speak a bit more about managing expectations around the tourist aspects?
Yeah, it's important to remember that tourism is an industry, and Machu Picchu is a global attraction. So, encountering vendors and souvenir shops is inevitable. The key is to go in with that awareness and not let it overshadow the historical and cultural significance of the place.
It's about finding that balance, right? Appreciating the craftsmanship of local artisans while also being mindful of potential tourist traps.
Exactly. And speaking of navigating crowds, Paloma's experience in Aguascalientes highlights the importance of being prepared for a lot of people, especially during the transfer to the buses.
That flag-bearing guide she mentioned seems like a crucial detail. It's a good reminder to pay attention and be ready to move quickly, especially on a tight schedule.
Absolutely. Efficiency is key when you only have one day. And once you're on that bus, winding up to Machu Picchu, take a moment to appreciate the journey itself.
I imagine the views are pretty spectacular.
They are. The bus ride offers glimpses of lush valleys, cascading waterfalls, and glimpses of the ruins themselves peeking through the clouds. It's a reminder that the journey is as much a part of the experience as the destination.
Okay, so you've arrived, you've taken in the views, now it's time for the guided tour. Paloma's itinerary included stops at all the major sites. The Plaza Sagrada, the Temple of the Three Windows, the main temple, the Intihuatana. It's a lot to absorb in a short amount of time.
And let's not forget that no backtracking rule. You have one shot to experience each site. So how can you make the most of that?
That's a great question. I'd probably be so focused on taking pictures that I'd forget to actually look around and appreciate the details.
It's a common challenge in our age of digital documentation. My advice: put the camera down every now and then. Take a moment to simply be present. Feel the weight of history, the energy of the place, the intricate details of the stonework. Let the experience seep into your senses.
Okay, I'm trying to imagine that right now, standing in the Plaza Sagrada, surrounded by those towering structures, feeling the cool mountain air, maybe even catching a glimpse of a condor soaring overhead.
Now you're getting it. That's the kind of connection that transcends ticking boxes on a list.
It's about creating a memory, not just capturing an image.
Precisely. And speaking of capturing experiences, let's not forget that delicious Peruvian lunch Paloma enjoyed at the Tinku restaurant. It's a reminder to fuel your adventure with some authentic local cuisine.
I'm all about that. Those dishes she mentioned, the calzada rellena, the ceviche, the lomo saltado, they sound amazing. It makes me wonder, what's the culinary history of the region? Did the Incas have a specific diet?
That's an excellent question, and it's a great example of how you can delve deeper into the cultural aspects of Machu Picchu, even on a day trip. The Inca diet was largely plant-based, relying heavily on potatoes, corn, quinoa, and beans. They also consumed llama and alpaca meat and guinea pig, which was considered a delicacy.
Wow, guinea pig. That's definitely not something you see on restaurant menus every day.
It's a reminder that food is a powerful window into a culture's history and traditions. And speaking of history, after lunch, it's time to make that descent back to Aguascalientes, keeping in mind Paloma's advice about arriving at the train station well in advance.
Right, logistics are key, especially with a tight schedule. And once back in town, Paloma squeezed in some time to explore the market. I imagine that's a sensory overload in the best possible way.
It is. The market is a vibrant tapestry of colors, textures, and scents. You'll find everything from hand-woven textiles and alpaca sweaters to intricately carved wooden masks and silver jewelry. It's a great place to pick up a unique souvenir or simply soak in the local atmosphere.
And then it's all aboard the train for the return trip. We talked about the two train options, the Expedition and the Vista Dome. You're going for the full experience. I guess the Vista Dome with its panoramic windows, snacks, and alpaca fashion show is the way to go.
It depends on your priorities. Some might find the extra bells and whistles a welcome distraction on the journey back, while others might prefer a quieter, more contemplative ride. It's about knowing what you enjoy and making a conscious choice.
I think the alpaca fashion show might be a bit much for me personally, but I can appreciate the novelty of it.
It's certainly memorable, and ultimately that's what travel is all about, creating memories that will last a lifetime. Whether you conquer Machu Picchu in a day or savor it over a longer period, the key is to approach it with an open mind, a curious spirit, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected.
So we've explored the practicalities of a day trip, the pros and cons of fast versus slow travel, and the importance of finding those moments of mindful connection, even amidst a busy itinerary.
And now, in our final part, we'll delve into some key takeaways and parting thoughts for anyone dreaming of experiencing Machu Picchu, whether it's a day trip or a multi-day adventure. Stay with us.
Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our Machu Picchu deep dive. We've covered so much, from like Paloma's crazy itinerary to this whole idea of fast versus slow travel.
It's been quite the journey. Now it's time to distill it all. Give our listeners some key takeaways, some things to think about.
Exactly. So imagine you're dreaming of experiencing Machu Picchu. What are the things you absolutely can't forget?
Well, I think the first one is this. A single day trip, it's doable, totally. But it's not like a magic solution for everyone. You really got to look inside, be real about your travel style. What are you hoping to feel, when you're there?
Right, because there's no right or wrong way to experience a place like that. A quick trip, it's efficient, you get that I did it feeling,
Yeah.
but it might leave you a little breathless,
Yeah.
rushed.
And the flip side, a longer trip, you get to go deeper, really soak in the history, the vibes of the place. But that takes more time, more money usually.
So it's like a balancing act, right? What you like, how much time you've got, and what's in your wallet.
Totally. And even if a day trip is all you can swing, you can still make it count. Less checking boxes, more feeling it.
Yeah, like choosing a smaller tour or maybe even getting a private guide. Taking those moments to just stop and breathe it all in.
Those little things make a big difference. Now, thinking about Paloma, what are some things people should just know going in, especially for a day trip?
Well, that 4 a.m. wake-up call isn't going away.
Be ready to be the early bird. And the tourist stuff, it's going to be there, the vendors, the shops, it's part of the package.
You got to roll with it, but not let it take over the whole experience.
Right. And those logistics, don't underestimate them. Lots of crowds, especially getting those buses in Aguas Calientes.
That guide Paloma had, the one with the flag, that seems like a must.
Yeah, and when you're on that bus going up to Machu Picchu, just take a second. Really look at what's around you.
The views have got to be amazing. It's funny, we've talked about all the planning, the stuff to watch out for, but it's easy to forget. Machu Picchu is just stunningly beautiful. It's a wonder.
You hit the nail on the head. We get caught up in the details, but it's a place that should make you stop and think.
So before we go, one last thought. Paloma's trip, it's stuck to the main path, hitting all the famous spots.
But what about what's beyond that?
Exactly. What else is hiding at Machu Picchu? If you like to explore, I'd say do some digging. Find those less traveled trails. Ask about different views. Go beyond the typical tourist thing.
You might find a hidden waterfall, a quiet spot in the trees, an ancient carving nobody else sees.
It's out there. And that brings us to the end of our Machu Picchu adventure. I hope you enjoyed coming along with us. Whether you're actually planning a trip or just need a little escape today, remember, be curious, be present, be open to the unexpected.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on the